not being part of this. I think I thought this is a good way to start, like rather than the usual exam-oriented talks. So this is more of a career-oriented talks, and it is heartening to see quite a few of you have joined for this lecture. I think at the end we can have a good discussion and interaction. But I think how to write a research paper. I think if you are well experienced, you have written almost more than 10 papers. I think most of the things that I'm going to cover in this part one, you would be knowing it. But if you are a fresher, I think this is a good initial part. I think maybe I'm planning to have 2 or 3 parts of this, how to write a research paper. And this particular lecture is going to be more like a general overview of how to put a question and how to put a research paper together. Second part will exactly go to the common mistakes and common problems that we encounter. And third, how to design a good research study will be the 3 parts. So why this is important? Why this is important? Why should we discuss about how to write a research paper for our students? You know, what is our population? 130 crores. And how many children are born? How many children are born with congenital heart disease? But how many original articles we have contributed in the field of any field, and in particularly in the field of pediatric cardiology? It will be minuscule. So you can't think of the great research that has happened in this country that changed the way we practice cardiology or pediatric cardiology. There will be very, very countless number of papers that have actually changed the way we practice cardiology or pediatric cardiology. So to this exercise, I did one my editorial. You could have gone into annals of pediatric cardiology. You would have looked at the editorial that we have put in. That was made in India. So we try to look at the research that is made in India and what are the major works that have happened in the country in the past 30 years. Why this idea came up? Because we wanted to know what are the most influential articles in pediatric cardiology. And there was a very good publication that was published in an international journal that looked at what are the most cited or most influential 100 articles in pediatric cardiology for the last 10 years. So obviously, none of our Indian articles were there. That was actually painful, despite seeing so many patients, despite having wonderful teachers and great people, great researchers who have published a lot. We realized that it's a high time we do capacity building in research papers, capacity building in research. So coming back to my listing of 30 papers in the last 30 years from India, I think you can refer to Annals of Pediatric Cardiology, the current editorial. So you'll be surprised to know that it came from very, very handful institutions by only the limited number of people. The only 20-25 odd people who are actually passionate about pediatric cardiology research have contributed to those articles that have been cited the maximum in the last 30 years. So I think we just need more people doing research, not only in pediatric cardiology, but across various facets of medicine. Basic reason why I agree for these talks are we are always net consumers of research than creators of research. That is the reason why these series we are going to present, and I think when time permits through Annals of Pediatric Cardiology, we'll be doing a lot of hands-on exercises. I think some real writing exercises and all those things we can do. So coming to our first question, I think the question of your research is the most important thing that will take you forward. So what should be the first question? I'm not talking about the question that you should be asking and answering in your research, but whenever you're planning a research study, the most important question is the paper needed? Is the paper needed? Is the research needed? Because it takes a lot to do an original research. Really a lot. Like for example, what is the process of doing a good research? You create a question, you create a null hypothesis, you choose the subjects, you do the, if it's an intervention thing, you do the intervention, if it's an observational thing, you do the observation, then finally collect the data, collate the data, edit the data, and then analyze the data and write it into a paper. So a lot of your time and energy is going to be wasted. If we realize this and stop doing these theses that we keep on doing, which are meaningless most of the time, we will save a lot of time and energy. Nothing should be done, no research should be done, that is not worth it. So how do you know whether the paper is needed or not? Not only your time, it takes a lot of effort and time from the patients, from the regulators, from the ethical committee. You send a paper to ethical committee, so many people sit there and read the papers and vote on the paper and decide on the paper. So much happens with a research paper. So first and foremost thing, you should be absolutely sure that whatever questions that you're asking needs an answer. That is a high priority thing that the pediatric cardiology community as a whole needs an answer to that question. So it should be absolutely worth it. For this, the most important thing that I'm going to stress today is going to be doing a good literature research. So before starting your thesis or your project research project, I think my topic is mostly towards writing a research paper, but the job starts much before that when you're in the planning stage of a research. So you need to do a good and a thorough literature search. Oftentimes when you're starting, commonly we do search in PubMed. We start the literature search. So for example, you want to profile a group of patients with myocarditis in children. So you obviously will put your search terms as myocarditis in children and search for original articles and review articles in PubMed. The best way will be you search it in Google also. Oftentimes Google nowadays produces better research than even PubMed. And another important thing is, for example, some good review article which is published in myocarditis in children recently, let's say 6 months back or 1 year back, and make it as your important paper and try to read all the references that are cited there. And nowadays, most of the major journals actually have a link to papers that are citing it. So for example, if you have a good paper in myocarditis in children, that particular paper will have all the previous citations of myocarditis in children. Not only that, it will have, in the citation to the paper, will have all the important things that are there, which are published after the paper is published. So this will be a good starting point. You get a good systematic review or a meta-analysis or a good review article or even a guideline which has addressed that question. You can start from there and try to read all the references and the citing literature to that. Then you go dig deeper into that. So what are the focus area of your research? Like not in myocarditis in children, but you want to specifically look at some aspect, go in deeper in and then do a good literature research. And I think once you do this, you will immediately come to know whether what you are doing is a original research or is it just a research. I think Indians are to be blamed or complacent. We are complacent and we oftenly do that such data is not existent in India and we want to do that again. Let me tell you, useless work takes the same amount of time or in fact more time than a good work or a great work. So that is the difference. That is the difference of doing good quality original research. So I'm telling you, after maybe publishing maybe around more than 200 papers in PubMed, that I spent a lot of time and energy in things that I should not have now. I realized that. Some things I need not have done, something I need not have written that way. Some papers I need not have sent to that particular journal first. So those kind of things I will be coming to that later. But most importantly, you should be absolutely certain when you start a research that this paper is needed. And then the other important question is, why should you do it? Why not somebody else? And why not your seniors? Will they allow it? Suppose if it is, for example, a classic example would be you are a senior resident who has joined in the department for the last 2 years. You want to take out the data of all epicardial and endocardial pacemakers done in the last 10 years. Should you be allowed to do that ethically, morally? So you have to get into that question that has to be clearly answered, and why should you do it? And whether you are authorized to do that, especially when it comes to retrospective analysis of the department of research. But these are the basic things that whether that research is needed or not. But coming to the most important question is the question that you want to answer in the particular research paper. So oftentimes when we start out, in younger career, we want to address everything that is there in that particular field and we want to finish it off in one study. This is the compulsion, and this is the impulse that we have when we are younger. We want to just do everything, every answer to every question that is possible in that field in one go. And if you look at it, no study is worth it if you are trying to answer too many things. So we just need one study, should have one question and one answer. So those are difficult to do, but these are the most important things. Then once you identify the question, then what is the correct method that we should follow? So what are the different types of studies? I think we'll be going on to this details later on. So like what is a cohort study, what is a randomized control trial, and how you should do it, and all those things we'll try to cover as we go on. But is the study method that you are choosing is appropriate for the question that you are trying to answer? This is not often the case. This is a very difficult thing. I think there will be so many examples. Even if you look at the journal, I think the best journals, if you go to, for example, Circulation and JACC, whatever these two things I'm telling you, that will be 100% there. The study will be one particular thing, trying to answer one particular thing, one primary endpoint if it's a randomized control trial, trying to answer whether that randomized endpoint is met by the intervention or not. And the method will be perfect. And the other important thing that we need to address is the method that we are doing, the study that we are doing is adequate and it has enough power. Like for example, you want to address the outcome of DCM1 follow-up in children. So you have taken around 100 patients. I don't know, like somehow I don't like the number 100. So a lot of studies, Indian studies have a fixed number of 100. That number, why we stop at 100, we don't know why we reach up to 100. It's not a century thing. Like you have to take adequate number, and that we need to calculate the sample size before the start of the study. Oftentimes I find whenever the papers come to me, the word sample size is missing the statistical method, and even oftentimes the section of statistical methods itself is missing in our articles. So the most important thing when you start the question is whether it is adequate and it has enough power or not. So I think these are the three important essential things before you venture into a research, try to answer a research question. So try to focus on one question, one null hypothesis, one primary endpoint. It's a randomized control trial. And make sure that whatever you are doing is correct method, and the methodology that you have followed is absolutely certain. Like for example, most of your cardiography studies, you might have done fantastic work with strains, speckle tracking, and all those things. But most of them, they don't have an intra and intra-observer variability tested and documented in the paper. So no good paper will take it. No good journal will take it. And as I told you, started with an example, like 100 patients, you want to do the long-term outcome, you have 20-25% patients are dropped out, and you have 4% mortality. So nobody is going to believe you. The study that you are doing has to be adequately powered to address the question that you are trying to answer. So that is the most important thing. So I think we'll be going into the details of this in future talks, like what are the methods, how do you choose each method for each studies, and how do you assess statistical power, and all those things. What statistical method you should use. All those things will go into the details in subsequent presentation. But in this, I'm trying to give you an overview of how to write and how not to research. So again, I reiterate, this is possibly the most important side of the presentation. Like one study, one question, one answer. You make sure that you do the correct method, which is adequate and which has enough power. So putting too much in one paper makes it diffuse and less compelling than if it is focused. So what are the most important things? Now we are coming to, once your research is over, what are the next questions that comes to your mind when you start writing a paper? So obviously, the top of your thing, where you want to send it to. Now I see a lot of good papers, a lot of very good papers are being presented in the conference. Like for example, just concluded PCAI 2021, we had more than 100 abstracts presented and good cases presented. And some of the award sessions were phenomenal. We had fantastic data. But our problem is, I can guarantee you and give it to you in writing, that out of the 100, 130 odd papers that are presented, less than 25% are going to reach to a journal and get published finally. We are overestimating. Not even 20, 25 are going to get published. That is where the challenge, and that is why this lecture series has been started. Even if you have done the work, we ultimately don't publish it. So what are the most important things? You need to identify the journal and identify the audience before that. Who is the particular audience who are interested in that question? So when you are younger, we always chase higher impact factor and more glamorous journals all the time. But as you ascend up, you understand that sometimes what you need? Ultimately, you need a satisfaction, a happiness at the end of the paper. Seeing your name, it gives you a thrill. So that is why we publish. And your peers should read it and appreciate it. That is what ultimately we want. What do we want? Is an appreciation from our peers. So let me tell you my examples. So I have publications in JAG, circulation, and all whatnot. But I wrote a paper on the various pattern of right heart catheterization and basically CCP, how we differentiate from RCM. I got more appreciation, more letters, more messages for that paper, particular paper, which was published in Indian Heart Journal than any of the major works that I published outside. So what that tells you one thing, you have to target your audience. And once you've chosen the audience, once you've chosen the journal, always remember to choose the right format. For example, a niche idea which has been done, very nicely done, but it's a negative study. You can easily think of a brief communication to a very big journal like Circulation also, which are likely to take. Whereas a full paper for the same is likely to be rejected by even Indian Heart Journal. So this is where the importance of format comes. Right? Whether you want to publish like a full paper, research paper, or a brief communication, or a research letter, or a scientific letter, or a letter to the editor. So there are various formats that are available like this for to publish your original research work, and you should choose the correct format. Oftentimes, once you, especially when you have done a good thesis and you have written a voluminous book and printed out a 100, 150 page book, it becomes very difficult to write it into 1,500 words in a brief communication format. But you should be willing to do that so that it reaches a wider audience. So, how do you choose the journal? The most important is the scope and the format of the journal. Obviously, if you're focusing on a developing country issue, if it is well done, still you can go to pediatric cardiology. Whereas if it is specifically focusing on India, then it is better to focus on Indian journals like AIIMS or pediatric cardiology in our field. So the scope and format of the journal is important, and the target audience, like for example, some of the peer journals that are higher ranked have a paid access. They don't have a free access. So the paid access journals are generally less read and less quoted, whereas the free access journals are generally well read, widely quoted. For example, we published a study of BP data of 180,000 people in Indian Heart Journal. It is less than 2 years now, and it is cited 62 times. Had I published it in a journal, I could have published this data in a bigger journal, but I wanted it to be getting focused among the Indians. So that is why we choose this. Especially people who are in the enter to this academic field, those who have started writing, I think they should get a guidance from the seniors and the mentors. So they have published, they know most of them, will immediately tell you which is the likely journal that is going to accept it quickly, and your life is better. So I would like to think, I think most of you know what is an impact factor. I think what is an impact factor? The impact factor, how is it being calculated? Everybody knows this. So impact factor is generally the number of articles that are published in a particular year and the number of citations that journal gets for those articles in the next 2 years. So that is the impact factor. Like for example, if the impact factor of one journal is 1, then that means average on an average, all the articles that are published are likely to be cited one time at least in the next 2 years. So what I'm trying to tell you is the impact that journal makes is more important than an impact factor. The choice of your journal is extremely important because otherwise wasted time and effort is much more. So commonly we do have a lot of waiting time and a lot of the churning time is different for different journals. And you start writing and then it goes to one journal. They take 3 months and then they reject it. And then you send it to another journal. It takes another 15-20 days for you to reformat it and then to another journal. And it sends it back after 3 months again. By the time your focus, joy of publication, you start forgetting the data. You don't like publishing that paper. All those things come. So a lot of time and effort is wasted. So you should better choose your journal properly. And now another important thing that has come up is the cost of publication. A lot of journals are now charging publication fees. So obviously, if your center or if your institution does not support it, possibly I think you should avoid publishing in journals that have high publication cost. Like for example, pediatric cardiology is absolutely free of charge, whereas another pediatric cardiology is free of charge. But congenital heart disease charges quite a lot of money to publish its articles. I think you should be aware which journal to publish and what is the cost of publication for us. From developing countries where institution support is limited, cost of publication becomes an important factor. So I wanted to ask you, like, if you have a data that is available, what will you write first? Various people will say, I will write the results first. Some people will say the introduction and the material methods I will write. Somebody will say the conclusions, but I would say possibly you should start with an abstract. Abstract is actually the heart of the matter. What is the importance of an abstract? Why you should write a good abstract? Why you should spend most of your time in writing a good abstract? Oftentimes what happens is, when you are writing a paper, you write the whole paper, like from introduction, material methods, results and conclusion. By the end, before you submit it, you suddenly realize, no, I haven't completed the abstract and I have quickly completed and uploaded. This oftentimes this happens. Even I have done it. But now I realize abstract is the most important thing that you should write first. Because it is sent to a good journal, say any journal, the editor receives quite a lot of material every day, week in, week after week in. So he doesn't have the time to go through the whole article most of the time. The most important decision, whether to send it for a review to a reviewer or send it for straightforward rejection or send it to the editorial board for review. These are the common things that we do once a paper comes. Commonly, the only thing most of the editors read is an abstract, where most of the younger generation who writes the paper spend the least time. So remember, each journal has its own format, and absolutely sticking to format is mandatory. Do not exceed the word count. And it is an art. It's an art. Like, for example, when you apply for a bigger grant, you are supposed to give your concept notes in 3 pages. Then when you have to summarize the whole research proposal into 3 pages and send it for research grant, you realize that how tough it is. It is easy to write 30 pages. So hence, writing an abstract of say 300 words or 200 words, whatever is the format, you have to absolutely stick to it. So most of them have a background, methods, research, material and methods, and results and conclusion. So you stick to the format, and you will go to good abstract writing and bad abstract writing in the future and in the future things. As I told you, you would have done a good research that would have taken 1 year time, and now you again do the good literature research before you publish it. Maybe in between, while you are preparing the research and presenting it into a paper, 2 more papers would have come. So always, once you have the background methods ready, once you got the protocol approved, from then whatever is new that has come in, you should go into that. I wrote new versus old, not only for this reason, but another reason, whatever you are presenting, is it new? And what is new? and what is the new message that you're going to give, and what are the old messages will be absolutely clear once you do a good literature research. I told you how to do a research, and obviously, whatever I told you, definitely you should avoid doing a research. Never just start a study because I think some American journal has published one study. You want to repeat that study and say that, oh, this is what happens in India also. Not many reviewers and not many editors are interested in publishing such articles. And there are so many other questions that we can answer in India. There is no dearth of patient, there is no dearth of question, there is no dearth of our problem. We can do research that is made in India. We can make it happen. Our generation, the future generation, that your generation has to do this. So, title. The title of the paper is again extremely important. I think if a paper comes to me, I think not only me, any other editor, mostly we read the title, where is it from, and what does the abstract says, and what are the tables and the conclusions, what are the conclusions say. That generally by and large we are able to make out whether it is nicely written or not. What is it? Title should be compelling and should be very simple and precise. I think I can tell you examples where I think I initially thought of giving you some bad examples where titles have been too long, too short, did not reveal anything, but did reveal everything. So everything is not right. So you have to follow whatever is the guidelines in the journal. According to the journal, you have to make the title. And some journals like Pediatrics and Indian Journal of Pediatrics and all are absolutely against the title revealing what is there in the paper. So I think I will tell you next time examples. What are the various options we thought in a particular title and why we choose that particular option? I'll give you examples. So this again is another important thing. The authors, deciding the authors list. And if you're a junior guy, possibly you have little control over this in Indian settings. But I think with more and more improvisations and more empowerment of people, I think is falling into place. Most of the time nowadays, anybody who does this as a thesis or a PhD project should be the first author. So I think better it is decided at first so that there is no confusion. And the list is created and the order is complete. And the corresponding author, who is going to be corresponding author, who is going to be the first author, everything is clear. And not only that, in terms of writing, everybody must contribute, and what is the role of each of them have played has to be clearly documented before starting writing, ideally. The same thing should be, nowadays most of the journals ask for what is the role each author has played. And there are various guidelines. The International Association of Editors have given exactly guidelines who should be authors, and that should be strictly followed in every sense in any scientific publication, which may be slightly difficult in Indian context, but I think we should strive to achieve that. So the paper of writing, so create outline first. Once you are done with your thinking and abstract, you should actually, the draft goes to multiple drafts. I think maybe if you are multi-authored, good research quality work, then you can think of, say, for example, 4 or 5 people team who are going to write, and you can divide among section wise, or somebody can write and somebody can add and edit before it is sent to all the other papers. And it is always a good idea to share your data. So never keep your data with you if there are multiple authors are there and they have not seen the data. It is, I think, mandatory that everybody has the data, and it's never appropriate just 1 or 2 people read and report the data. It is always better at least 2 or 3 people, if it's a large data research paper, at least 2 or 3 people have seen the data and vetted it. And you always keep a file name with dates, and then one file written over with a new draft. You keep on maintaining that draft. So I think you can keep it in a folder, and then most important thing is tables and figures are absolutely important. They prompt more analysis. They get your clarity of thinking into your paper. Your paper writing is a serious business. The higher you write, it needs more space, more energy from you. So that, I think, the clarity has to be absolutely clear. It has to be very important. The clarity of thought process is important. So get your tables. Is my screen visible? So get your thought process clear and make the tables and figures much early, and always keep a deadline to you and your co-authors. Oftentimes, research papers go on and on and on, and I think ultimately, beyond the limit of time, generally they become meaningless at times. So, coming to the introduction part of the journal of the paper, I think the introduction is actually a very, very important thing. I think some of the data suggests that oftentimes people read they start reading a paper, they start looking at the abstract and flip over the tables and then start reading introduction. If it is not good, then they stop reading the article particularly. So you have to draw the audience in. You have to be provocative and make it interesting. At the same time, be scientific. So it has to be specific to a journal audience. For example, if you're writing to a pediatric paper and you are a pediatric cardiologist, the address and the issues should be addressed in such a way that every pediatrician is able to understand that. And always identify the gaps in knowledge and clearly state that this is what is the gap, and always start from what is known and what is the unknown territory that you are trying to answer. And remember this, the introduction is not a discussion. Do not try to overdo or overemphasize your research that you are doing. And end with actually the hypothesis or the question that you want to answer in this. So maybe it is not more than 2 or maximum 3 paragraphs. And it should not be that it's a part of a discussion that most of your the citations that you are going to quote, the references that you are going to quote are already there in the introduction. So coming to the method section, I think for me, I think the methodology is the most important part of any paper. Anybody who reads the method, especially in a research project, in a randomization study, or in a basic science study, anybody who reads your method should be able to reproduce it. It should be clear. It should not be too much. Should not be there, and it has to be detailed. Every detail that should be there. For example, like if you are doing a study on some devices, I think the device, where is it available? If you are using some specific catheters, who makes this catheter, where is it available? All those information has to be there. And the 4 things that I'm going to tell you are absolutely essential, which are oftentimes missing in our papers. So in today's time, even a retrospective study needs an ethical approach. And if you are doing a new research, and if an ethical committee wants a new drug or a new experimental therapy is being tried out, nowadays it is mandatory to get DGC approval. Even though in pediatric cardiology, anecdotal cases, we are getting away without DGC approval, but for a large series, for a randomized control trial, all those things are DGC approval is a must. Any major study, even if it is observational or interventional or a randomized control study, must be registered with the registering agency. That is the CTRA registration. And one thing that is commonly missing is consent is a must. I think we have taken a decision that without consent, most of the papers will be rejected in Annals of Pediatric Cardiology also. So what is the importance of the CTRA registration? I think this is clinicaltrials.gov. The ICMR has created the CTRA. So whenever you do a randomized control trial, you must register it. So that the idea is that everything is pre-decided. It is not that post hoc after the study has started and then it's carried out, you know the endpoints, and then finally you tweak the endpoints so that you get a positive study. That you cannot do. So in CTRA, you already decided and already given, this is my study, this is my study population, these are my endpoints, this is the duration of the study, this is how I'm going to recruit the patient, every information you have given. Now you cannot go back, and that is, I think, very essential in any interventional study or a randomized control study. So results, I think, again, it's the art to present the results in table. And I would suggest all of you, when you are in the deciding phase, when you're starting your thesis, when you're starting your project, already make your dummy table. Be ready with your dummy table. What all information you want to give in your final output. And always compare whether you are capturing all the information that are needed for that table you want to make. Beforehand, like I'm telling you, suppose a study takes 2 years, I think your study table should be mentally or physically ready with you when you are preparing the study itself. So that, for example, you will need the time, for example, a pacemaker, your follow-up of pacemaker, you want to capture For example, how long a pacemaker interrogation has been done or something like that, that you wanted in your table, but that information is not captured in your case report form. Once you entered the data, once you collected the data, then suddenly you need to, okay, this information we didn't collect, then you have to go back to the whole population to get the data again. So even in a retrospective study, it's always better to have your plan for your tables and figures and make a dummy one and keep it ready. And always never replicate whatever is written in the table, except for a major finding that you have. Other things you should not be repeatedly telling this. And always, if, for example, many of you have a habit of cutting and pasting from your protocol and writing a paper, so the methods and results has to be in past tense. And here in research, we just don't need any interpretation. That interpretation, that final has to be shifted to discussion. Results is just results, just enough of tables and figures, and make sure that you write around those tables and figures the whole of research. Never repeat whatever is given in your tables and results, the figures in the result section. So that I think is a very important thing in research. The discussion section, always start with the first paragraph where you say that this is a question that we wanted to answer the hypothesis, and this is what we found, and this is the importance of our study. For example, this is the first study documenting the prospective study of aortic arteritis in children, the first documenting, so on and so forth. And this is what we found. This is your first paragraph. Then you go on how your study adds and compares with other studies, the literature review that you have already done, and then always the other findings of your study, and end with the strengths and limitations of your study and the implications of your study. So don't overdo this and always be conservative in this. And always end with a good conclusion. I think, as I told you, majority of the people, there's a survey that went on. Majority of people, they just read the abstract, read the introduction, flip through the figures and tables, and read the conclusion. So this is how most of the people read a paper. So remember that these sections are nicely written, and the conclusions, oftentimes I find the major problem that happens in our research, and even when freshers start writing research, they want to conclude much beyond what is there in the particular paper. Remember this. The conclusion should be conclusion of your research paper, the research question that you answer, and what it leads to. And be always humble and be conservative. Don't overwrite and overdo things. So I think I told you, like, the brief synopsis of writing an abstract, I think is very important. Introduction has to be limited to 1 to 2 things, and I think oftentimes methods should be the longest part, and results have to be the important things that are to be there. So then nowadays, some of our journals, like the Pediatric Academy and various other journals, ask for a good reviewer's name. So you can suggest a few reviewers who are experts in the field and who are likely to see your paper favorably. But oftentimes the reviewers irritate you, so don't get irritated. The reviewers suggest you. It's like exams. Like, I think examiner is always the boss. So you don't argue with your examiner. The same way, don't argue with your reviewer. Reviewer is generally always right. Whether they are not or not, they are always right, and you tend to answer. Don't be in a hurry. Take your time. Digest the reviews, what they are trying to suggest. Oftentimes, somebody gets angry and writes a nasty review, comments back to the reviewers. Don't do that. And take it positively, because this is the reviewer's job. It's a thankless, painful job. They don't get anything out of it. Most of the journals don't pay reviewers. Almost 99.9% journals don't pay the reviewer. They are doing out of their academic curiosity. They want to impart knowledge, and this is the fulcrum at which the academic medicine goes around. That is the review process. If you take away review process, I think the whole academic journals and the scientific writing will fall flat. So peer review process is extremely important. So respect to your reviews that you got from your reviewers, and try to digest those reviews and then answer it appropriately. So oftentimes your paper may be rejected, So I don't feel disheartened. Like, I think every forum I presented for an award session, I got more rejections than more awards, but still I have more awards. Same way, I have many papers, but I think if, for example, I have 200 papers, maybe I would have been rejected, say, around 600 times. So don't feel rejected. So most important thing is, was it sent out for a review? If not, you are thinking seriously wrong. If you are over-assessing your thing, or you didn't check the type of journal. So always think, if it is not reviewed, then always think that you are overestimating your research and try to change the type of journal. Again, if the reviewers have suggested something, always address it and try to send to a more favorable journal that is likely to consider your research favorably. If they haven't suggested anything, quickly send it again to the next in line. So often it's a good idea to have an idea like, okay, I will try these journals first before I go to, say, AIIMS or Pediatric. These are something that you can think of. And the important things, how do you decide which three to support, which three to go? It again depends on the format it accepts, what is the audience that it caters to, what is the impact of the journal, not only the impact factor, and also the cost implication. You decide on that, you make a particular list, and there I think senior people and people who have published help you. One important thing at this stage, I think you can consider is in the research space itself. Nowadays, many people are actually interested in collaborating. For example, one of the colleagues, Dr. Saurabh Gupta, has published a lot of work with Dr. Anderson. So now people, it can be quite easy to communicate with big people also, who are the experts in the field. It may be a good idea if you want to really think big and you want to get into a very good international journal. Start in the protocol phase itself. Start from there and try to involve some senior people, like maybe Indian also, outside your institution. You can start involving them, and they bring in value to the paper, and they bring in language to the paper, and they bring in meat to the paper. That is a very interesting way, an important way in which you can improve quickly. So this is, I think, the basic overview of research paper writing. I think maybe the next thing I will go into the writing part itself, and then maybe the third I will go for the research methodology part, like which study, how do you do sample size, and all those things. Hope you really liked it, and it was heartening to see at least 10-15 people listening to such a lecture. Thank you. Is there any questions? Can I answer some questions?